The silence was broken by a gentle linking sound that had long been missing in the cavern. Once, what now seemed like lifetimes ago, the sound of linking was so ubiquitous, it wouldn't even garner a glance if someone appeared out of thin air. Now, however, silence was the only resident of the cavern. Occasionally, fish swarming on the surface of the lake or rocks falling somewhere in the distance being the only sounds to break the quiet emptiness of the once great city. Atrus took a few steps forward and looked around. Not that it did much good in the darkness. He unclipped the lantern hooked to his belt and raised it before him, his left hand following the contour of the base until his fingers found the knob. As soon as he started to turn the knob, the fire marble in the lantern began to brighten, illuminating the room. He took a few more steps, surveying his surroundings, examining what he could see along the walls. From what he remembered, it was just as he had left it. A second linking sound filled the room as a figure started to form in the exact spot Atrus appeared just a few moments ago. "Atrus?" the figure called out a moment after the linking was complete. Atrus instantly turned around, pointing his lantern to share the light with his new guest. But there was no need. Unlike him, Catherine had linked, holding up a lantern of her own, lit and ready to use in the darkness. "How does it look?" she asked, looking around the room herself. "It looks the same," he replied, "although it's just a cursory observation. It doesn't look like any more cave-ins have occurred since the last time we were here, at least in this room." "Well, that's a relief," she said as she continued to scan the room. It had been almost 30 years since the last time they were here together, or at least he believed it that long. Now that he thought about it, it may have been even longer. The last time he was here was also with Catherine, not too long after his father was trapped in the prison book on Riven. He walked towards the desk that still sat exactly how he left it. As he took a closer look, so many memories started to flood into his thoughts. This was where his father had trapped him when he was a boy. This was where he first plotted with Catherine to escape Riven and trap his father on his 5th age. He had spent so much time here, desperately trying to correct his father's flawed writing to prevent the collapse of his 5th age. It strangely felt more like he was looking at his home rather than a desk. It could not have been more than a second or two that his gaze stalled upon the desk as he processed all the memories that had suddenly overtaken his thoughts. But to Atrus, inside that moment, it felt like hours. He quickly turned his head to see if Catherine noticed his momentary pause, only to see she was already looking at him. Her face warm and gentle, as if silently telling him she understood exactly what was happening. Atrus curled his lip in a sheepish smile, his heart instantly calming. She never ceased to amaze him. Somehow, she always knew what he was thinking, what he was feeling. She always knew what to say and how to say it, sometimes speaking without saying anything at all, and it came so naturally to her. When he had been taken from the cleft by his father, he spent many years alone, missing the companionship he had had with his grandmother. His father had hardened himself, conditioned himself to a point where he did not need anyone else's companionship. Atrus, however, never allowed himself to harden like that, even when he was all alone. But he did get used to it. When he met Catherine, he had almost come to accept his solitude, his experiments and studies becoming his only companions. Almost come to accept. The moment he met Catherine, it all changed. From the moment he met her, he knew she was special. And after all this time, she effortlessly continued to prove his original estimation of her with everything she did. His lip curled up into an endearing smile as he looked at her, the smile saying more than his words ever could. She smiled back with the same loving look, reassuring him she knew exactly what he was thinking. He stepped past the desk a few paces and shone the light in the direction of a small opening in the wall where 2 support pillars had collapsed many years ago. "It still looks open," he said, keeping his eyes on the hole while turning his head ever so slightly to make sure his words reached Catherine clearly. "It looks like the reinforcements held up after all this time. Excellent." He waited the few seconds it took for Catherine to catch up with him, and after giving her one more glance, he crouched down a few inches and started to move through the opening, Catherine close behind. Most of the hallway beyond the door was left intact after the collapse of the large part of the northern wall, but he could not have known that at the time. At the time, it felt like the whole basement had caved in on itself, leaving him with no way out, other than the linking book that his father had left him on the desk before he locked him inside that large stone room. And being that he was so young, with no tools or supplies, it was his only way out. Even when he returned many years later as a full-grown man, it took him a good week and a half to dig out and reinforce the opening through the rubble large enough to get through, and a second week to enlarge the opening to a point where he could get through while carrying something. It was considerably cooler here than it was on Myst. Being the lowest part of the great house, it was naturally cooler because of the damp rock walls around them. Many of the old great houses had dug deep into the rock to utilize the cooler temperatures to keep the climate of their house more regulated. The great lake that these mansions were built around was quite deep, and the colder temperature of the deep water cooled the rock the lake sat in. Over millions of years, the rock around the lake had cooled to the same temperature as the water, and the Denis realized that they could take advantage of this natural occurrence. It didn't take them long to get to the part of the house they were looking for, the level where most of the living accommodations were located. This was where his room was when he lived here with his father and Rajas. He knew what he was looking for was somewhere here, but could not remember exactly where he left it. It was so long ago, and when he left, he hardly gave any thought about where to leave it in case it was ever needed in the future. He looked around, deciding where to begin his search. "I'll start here," he said, looking at the door to his old room. Catherine walked past him and went to the next door down. "And I'll start in here, Atrus." They had predetermined they would split up, each searching different areas in hopes to cut their search time by half. This was an exceptionally large house, and even though Atrus was sure what he was looking for was here in the house, he had no idea where exactly it was. Now, he documented and labeled all of his supplies, studies, and experiments. All his libraries were carefully organized and methodically kept in their place, so he knew exactly where everything was if ever a need would arise for anything in the future. In his younger years, he did not expend as much effort in organization. "And Atrus," Catherine said, raising the tone of her voice slightly as she said his name, "don't get distracted, my love. You told Yisha we would be home for dinner." And with that, she opened the heavy wooden door and disappeared into the room, ready to begin her search. Atrus laughed to himself as he thought about what Catherine just said. She was right. There were so many things here to distract him. He could easily spend hours in each room, recalling the memories and events associated with every area and item he came across. His inquisitive nature and cultivated curiosity would take over, and he would lose himself in thoughts and wonder. What seemed like mere moments ended up being many hours. But he didn't have many hours today. He had told Yisha he would be back for dinner with a surprise for her, and he was going to keep his word. "Focus, Atrus," he said to himself as he opened the door, entering his old room. They had searched for over an hour now with no success. When they started, there was energy and excitement between them, born from not knowing exactly what they may find after all these years of absence. But now, the excitement had had time to wear off, and what started as an adventure became a chore that they wanted to finish so that they could get back. They met up in the hallway on the second level as Atrus came out of the last room to be searched on the floor. "I really thought sure I left it here, Catherine," he said, furrowing his brow, openly disappointed. "I'm sure you did, my dear, but it was so long ago, Atrus. You can't be expected to remember everything." Her words didn't comfort him much. "I'm sorry I dragged you along with me. I didn't mean to waste your time." A subtle hint of dejection in his voice. "Oh no, Atrus. I enjoyed my time very much revisiting this forgotten age with you. It's been a long time since we explored like this together." A smile came across his face. Catherine always had a way of making him feel better about himself, one of the many things that endeared him to her. "What about your father's study?" she asked. "Could you have perhaps left it in there?" Instantly, Atrus' expression changed from disappointment to a surprised curiosity. His mind started to race, going over each fragmented memory he had of the house. Yes, I may have." His voice energized with excitement. He came up to Catherine and took hold of her hand, and in an instant they were heading towards the stairs that led up to the third floor. Atrus' excitement seemed to make the ascent effortless. Perhaps not so effortless for Catherine, but she did like seeing Atrus excited, and it was her suggestion, after all, that reignited his enthusiasm, so she tried her best to keep up with him. A few moments later, they stood outside the door of his father's study. He came up close to the door, his left hand pushing against the old wood as his right hand reached up so his fingers could feel along the top of the doorframe. "Ah," he said, when his fingers felt the key he was looking for. The whole time he had spent living here, his father had religiously locked the doors to his study each time he had left the room unoccupied. After the events of Riven, Atrus had found a second key in his father's belongings. The day he left Denis with Catherine, he had taken what books he needed from the study. After closing the doors and starting to walk away, he found himself pausing. For a moment, he just stood there, realizing the strangeness of leaving the doors unlocked for the first time in his life. He wanted to leave them that way, but something inside of him just wouldn't let him walk away. A feeling of obligation, he first thought. An obligation to keep the strange tradition of his father. But it was more than just a feeling of obligation. His compulsion to lock the doors reached deeper than just cold duty. Respect. It was respect that he was feeling. Despite everything he had endured at his father's hands, he still felt a strange, unexplainable motivation to respect his father's wishes about securing the privacy of his study. He stood there a moment longer, trying with all his might to keep going, but his legs just wouldn't move. His heart wouldn't let him. He went back into the study to retrieve the second key and lock the doors of the study. The moment he turned the key and heard the sound of the bolt falling into place, locking the door, a long-awaited sensation of freedom washed over him. Any type of familial debt his father brainwashed him into believing he owed him was now paid in full. He was finally free of his father's self-sacrificing grip, this action being the last thing that tied his sense of family and obligation to his father, the key being the last vestige of his relationship with him. Now, he was only Gen. He had no desire to keep the key, but at the same time didn't want to discard it. Not just because of its obvious practical use if he ever needed to open the doors again, but because of what it symbolized now. He had looked around for an out-of-the-way place he could leave the key, somewhere safe for future retrieval that was also away from any unwelcomed eyes. As his sight came to the top of the doorframe, he knew it was exactly the right hiding spot he was looking for. A bit cliché, he knew, but the frame had a groove between the frame and the wall that would facilitate his purpose perfectly. And after all these years, it was still there, just as he left it. The door opened with the same smoothness it had always done. With both of their lanterns in the room, there was enough light to easily see everything around them. His father had left dozens of books spread all around the room, some in piles, others in piles that have since fallen over. Many books opened to specifically marked pages. What they were looking for, though, would not have been buried in the mess. He would have left it somewhere near the top of wherever he left it, narrowing the criteria of their search by a considerable amount. After only a few minutes, it was Catherine that broke the silence. "Atrus, is this it?" she asked, pulling a greenish book from one of the piles next to the desk. "It's green, like you described it to be." Atrus quickly paused his own search and came up to Catherine, a feeling of hopefulness and excitement coming over him. The moment his eyes met the book, he instantly felt a feeling of familiarity go through him. As he gently took the book from her hands, he walked a few steps to be closer to the lanterns where he placed it on the desk. He blew on it and brushed his hands over the cover several times, attempting to see what was written under the decades-long collection of dust. A moment later, he realized that Catherine had indeed found what they were looking for. His eyes moved slowly over the markings etched into the hard leather cover, and as they did, he began to read them aloud. The Book of Tiana.